This is an interview with Kevin Coate, and this is being recorded for the hospital story and possibly for other uses further on. Kevin, thanks very much for sharing your experiences with us. You grew up in wartime, post-war Margaret River in the 1940s. What was the sense of the town and the district at that time? Were your memories of that?
Yes, I've got fairly good memories of the area, because Margaret River at that time was a very small town, gravel road going through the main street, horse trough outside the hotel. A lot of people were still travelling horse and cart. Vehicle travel was restricted in lots of ways during wartime because shortage of fuel. There was quite a few vehicles. I know with the factory, some of the trucks up there had gas producers on them. They used to use charcoal to help them. And the country was, a lot of it still uncleared. Many of the farms, and that, remember most of the farms all had dead ringbark trees all around them from the group settlement time.
Some of the paddocks looked like sort of tree cemeteries.
They did, and they were. There was a tremendous lot of dead trees.
There were two main industries at that time, weren't there? The dairying and forestry. In a sense, those are almost contradictory, aren't they? Because you need paddocks for the cows and you need forests to be kept to be cleared. What was the sort of balance between those two things?
Oh, I don't think there was any balance really. It was a matter of clearing and opening up the land. I don't think there was any sense of preserving forest or anything as such at that time. It was concentrated on. There was timber milling going on. There's East Switchcliffe Mill and a couple of other spot mills around the area, and dairying was seemed to be the main impetus for a living for many people.
How was the dairying? Was it successful for the people who were dairy farmers?
Oh, look, it was really tough, especially in the early days. I can remember my father talking about some of the people that had farms. As he said, a lot of them weren't farmers, didn't know much about it. And during the war, after the Depression, I remember him saying that several times he helped them escape debt and everything by getting on a midnight train to back to Perth and do that sort of thing. No, it was a pretty tough life and a hard life for them. Everything was done by hand. I know my father-in-law, when they came down in the middle 1940s, very little land cleared on their place, and he did most of it by hand. He did it, felled it, axe and crosscut saw, and then burnt, and had horses to help pull it together. And it was only getting towards the end of the 1940s that bulldozers started to come in and make life easy. I remember opposite the school, or just going down the hill from the school, that was all bush. Going down towards where the doctor's surgery was, that was all bush. And I saw my first bulldozer there pushing down and clearing that land. It was pretty tough for farmers, anyone trying to live off the land those days.
It's a 7-day-a-week job, isn't it?
Dairy farming is, yes. Except during summer, there was a brief respite for people, not much money for them, but they used to quite often dry cattle off in summertime, middle of summer. But then again, as a byproduct of milking, most dairy farmers had a few pigs. So quite often they had to keep milking a few cows because milk was the main thing. They get a bit of grain, but milk product was one of the main things, keep their pigs going.
You talk about the Baltic camp. That suggests migration, doesn't it? What was the Baltic camp and what was done there?
Across the road from where we lived in now Railway Parade, I can't remember it ever having a name there in my day, we lived next to the railway line and down from the railway station, and there were a number of railway workers had houses there, and there was an area of vacant land right next to the railway line, and new Australians were brought out to Australia at that time, many of them from Baltic countries. There was a number of them were established as a condition of them coming to Australia. They worked for 2 years for the government, and they had tents. There were 6 families opposite us. They had tents to live in, and they worked for the railways as fettlers on the railways. That was their job. They stayed there for about 2 years. Lovely people. Some of them couldn't talk much English.
And when the 2 years were up, what was the retention rate? Did they stay on?
There was only one family in Margaret River that I knew that stayed on for a while, and that was the Goggles. That was a family. They first came out in about 1950, I think, with another couple that were there, and they were sent down to Flinders Bay to work on the railways there. And then they came up to Margaret River and stayed in the tents there. But the rest of them dispersed. I know a couple of them went to Perth. Some years ago we met up with a couple of them and had a reunion. And one family went to Collie, but there's another family or another two families, I don't know what happened to them. They didn't stay in Margaret River. But one of the ladies was very good at sewing. She was a dressmaker and seamstress in Poland, where she came from, and she used to do quite a bit of dressmaking.
You talk about playing sport at school, also in the forestry. How important was sport in the Margaret River district?
Oh, sport was very important, in the communities there, and there's a lot of rivalry in those days. The main sport, of course, was Australian rules football and cricket during summer. So we had some quite strong teams, and we had an A and B grade team there for a while. Other sports, of course, were tennis. Tennis was very, very strong. At school, we played football, we played cricket, and the girls played softball, and they started up a basketball team there when I was a kid. And of course the other big sport at school was marbles. We used to play marbles.
In the classroom or beyond?
No. We used to be out underneath the pine trees.
Another topic completely. In 1946, a pipe was installed to provide the hospital with water via a gravity feed from the butter factory area. Do you remember that happening?
No, I can't. I remember vaguely my father having quite a bit to do with it, but I can't actually remember it. I seem to remember, though, in the earlier than that, at the back of the butter factory there was a depression in a swampy area, and I seem to remember a pump working there to pump water up at the time, but the area was quite good soil, and most of the butter factory workers had a garden down there, which sometimes they used to grow very good vegetables in it.
Jenny's very interested in collecting any recollections of hospitals, and you mentioned Dr. Barrett in your forestry book. Do you have any memories of him?
Yes, Paddy Barrett came to Margaret River. He was very interested in sport. He started to play football. He's a very good footballer, quite a tall sort of a fella, but he was stopped from playing it in case he injured himself at the hospital. But he was also a very good photographer, and he had one of the first 35mm cameras using colour film that I saw, and he used to take lots of photos of the teams playing and marking. It must have been fairly fast speed, because he showed photos afterwards to the club of people in the air reaching for the ball, marking football. He was a very well-liked person. My Yvonne's cousin-in-law, there was a group of young blokes there, used to hang out together with him, and they all spoke quite highly of him, although he was a bit wild in some of his doings, so as they were.
There was a predecessor, Dr. Tunbridge. Do you remember him as well?
Yes, I remember being examined by Dr. Tunbridge down there. I think I had my appendix out, if I remember rightly, at the hospital. I think Dr. Tunbridge did that job.
That's a nice lead-in, isn't it? Because what are your main memories of the hospital? I suppose your particular operation, but what was it like? Do you recollect the atmosphere?
Well, the atmosphere in the hospital, as I remember it, was always good. I spent a short time in there when I had an accident when I was falling in the forest department, and it was always very positive. We used to quite often meet up with some of the nurses there. Most of those were local people. I think Gay Pearce was a matron. She would have been there about the time I was there, if I remember rightly. I'm a bit vague on it, I should say.
Forestry is potentially quite a dangerous occupation, isn't it? Were there many accidents or forest-related injuries that you recall?
Timber falling for mills, as in forestry, was always a dangerous job. But forestry itself, as in the job that I had with the state government, I don't think that was terribly dangerous. Not as dangerous as what fallers experienced when they were working for the timber mills.
The saws were the danger, weren't they?
Well, they were later when I was working down there until well into the 50s. It was still hand axe and crosscut saws, and then power saws came in, and the first power saws that came in were circular saws, and they were deadly if you didn't handle them rightly. If they got a grip and they would flip around, a person could be killed quite easily.
I've heard a few stories like that. The forestry comment you made suggests you were really trained in safety, avoiding being in the wrong place when a tree was falling. All that,
right.
You were really well briefed about that as a worker.
Yes, as a worker, you were briefed very quickly. You check your trees, make sure there was no limbs hanging down, and so on. You were trained to fall a tree in the right direction, and you'd send it down that way, and you'd make sure that you were well clear when it started to fall in case it split or limbs were shed. So it was dangerous, and it was dangerous cutting it up afterwards and transporting it too, on wagons or whatever it was going to be.
The original whim, of course, in the early days.
Yes. Well, they were still in use in the Karri forest, especially when we were there.
Wind was a factor too, wasn't it? In a wind-blown situation, you had to be particularly careful, I guess.
That's right. Yeah.
The railway was such an important part of that district, wasn't it? The Margaret River district. What are your memories of the railway's role?
Oh, I've got fond memories of the railways. Having lived next door to it. And there used to be a lot of to and froing when they were shunting wagons down from railway stations where we were. Some of the memories I have are of the trains coming in at night time, and if it was a wet night or anything, lying snug in bed with rain pouring down on the tin roof, and you'd hear the train coming up towards the railway station. And if the train driver didn't put enough sand on the rail from the sandbox, all of a sudden you'd hear this sudden acceleration of the driving wheels and everything, and so it went.
As kids, I always remember people putting coins on railway lines. Was that a practice you indulged in yourself?
Yes, we did try that because some kids told us and showed us some pennies that they'd put on the railway line, and it had flattened them out. We were intrigued by this, and we decided to see if it worked ourselves. Despite some kids telling us if you put anything on a railway line, you'd likely to derail the train. Well, we didn't derail the train, and we were quite excited afterwards to find out that they were flattened out like pancakes, but they were not spendable, and because pennies were worth a bit in those days, we didn't pursue them.
We've talked about that particular enjoyment, but in practical terms, what difference did the railway make, having that long line, really ultimately taking you all the way to Perth and beyond?
Well, it made a big difference to the district because the roads were terrible in those days, and trucks, for the timber mills and everything, there was a lot of timber, a lot of sleepers, a lot of the mills cut sleepers, and it was a quick and easy way to get them through to Busselton, to the port at Busselton or Bunbury. Most of the sleepers went through to Busselton, and freight, it was much easier to get it down there. It made a big difference to the town. I think later on, bitumen came about, and they stopped passenger trains coming down. They had the railway road buses that used to come down then. It wasn't probably so important towards the end of road transport.
And any town needs supplies. Was the railway helpful, for example, for business or the hospital or areas like that in bringing down needed goods?
Yes, just about everything did come down by rail, be offloaded there. And most importantly for us kids, ice cream used to come down. Mrs. Whitewood's shop in the main street, she used to sell ice cream, and it'd come down in in big containers, sort of leather, all packed with ice around, and we would wait for this to be brought out, and it had to be used fairly quickly before the ice went, but at threepence a cone it was pretty good.
You've mentioned this form of transport. If not the railway, how did people get about?
Well, there was some pretty ancient cars during the war years, and like I say, with restrictions and everything, as far as petrol goes, horses were quite often used. There's quite a few people used to transport themselves into town. The Pearces, the old bridge used to, Alfie Pearce and his wife, they used to come to town on a horse and cart. Land was up the other side, Garstons, they all used to, other people quite often used to come to town, horse and cart or horse. Yeah.
In connection with the hospital, of course, that could mean, for example, if there's a difficult labour for a woman or an injury for somebody, that would have affected, the vital time taken to get you into hospital, wouldn't it?
Oh, I would say so. Yes, yes. Like say, accessing through some of these places would have been slow. I know they were concerned in the early days. I know my mother, I think she took a first aid course about 1932. I think that was when they first started doing first aid courses there. I think it might have even been before the hospital came. But there was concern, for that sort of thing.